there's many, many people who are starving for a word of encouragement. And if you provide that, they run with it. And that's great, but it also reveals this terrible unnecessary lack. It's like, well, why weren't they encouraged to begin with? You know, and that's a deep hole to fall down. And, you know, because you can never stop answering that question once you start asking it. And, you know, it has something to do with the fundamental difficulty that everyone who's human has in valuing their own existence because of its imperfections and finitude. And what you want to do is, for your child, is that you want the best for the best in them. That's what you want. And that's what you want from people that you surround yourself with. Now, they'll hold you to a high standard if that's the case, right? Because whenever you degenerate in any of the multiple ways that you're likely to degenerate, they're going to like whack you on the back of the head and say, you know, clue the hell in, you know, you're demeaning yourself. You're less than you could be. And there's real judgment in that, and it's harsh, you know, but with friends, it's the same thing. You want friends. They're not friends if they're not these people. You want friends who, when something good happens to you, that's good for you, right? They're happy about that. They're not like all bitter and resentful underground and like saying horrible things behind your back and telling you how they did something that was better and trying to drag you down. It's like, that's not helpful. And then when something bad happens to you and you go to them and you say, look, this terrible thing happened to me. First of all, they don't try to top it with some like horrible thing that happened to them because they don't have the patience to listen. And second, they're not secretly gloating about the fact that catastrophe finally befell you. It's like they're actually hurt by it. And that chapter is an injunction. Is like, take a look at the people that are around you. And if they're not on the side of what's good for you, then walk away. Because, well, first of all, that's best for them too. If you put up with that, all you're doing is enabling it. It's like, well, it's okay that you mistreat me in a way that's harmful to me and everyone else. It's like, actually, no, that is not okay. It's not the least bit okay. That doesn't mean you shouldn't try to help someone when they're down. That's a whole different issue. Well, what should you do with your life? And like, I've seen people who've accomplished anything that you can imagine in terms of accomplishments. And I can say clearly that I've never seen anything as rewarding as the consequences of forthright speech, the opportunity to be of genuine service to other people. There's way more reward in that than in any of the things that people chase in a more finite and limited way. To stand up straight with your shoulders back is to open yourself up to the world. You're not in the defensive crouch of a prey animal, technically speaking. And that is the circuitry that's governing posture. It's prey versus predator, something like that. And to stand up like that is to expose yourself to the world, but in a bring it on sort of manner. Not precisely combative, but let's say courageous. And your posture announces that. And it doesn't just announce that to other people. It announces that to yourself. And it can be one of those things that can start a virtuous cycle occurring, which is partly why it's taught in the military. You get these guys that come in, they're all slumped over, they don't know how to stand up, they're looking at their feet, their necks are bent. Like, even if they're good-looking men, they don't look good because they're all crunched over. You see people like this on the street all the time. They could be perfectly attractive, except they're completely huddled in. You know, they need to stand up and stretch themselves out. And then they can breathe too. And that's a competent stance. But one of the things that the critics of the modern West don't understand about hierarchies is that, first of all, they're everywhere. They're inevitable. If you're going to have a distinction of value between things, you have a hierarchy. And if you don't want to get rid of the distinction of values between things because then you don't have anything to do. That's foolish. You can't live that way. So I say, well, the hierarchies are based on power. It's like, no, they're not. They're based on competence. And there isn't anything more powerful than competence. But power isn't tyranny. It's not brutality. It's not threat. It might be the hint of all those things. You know, because I don't think you can be fully competent without being able to hint at those things. But hierarchies in the West are fundamentally based on competence. It doesn't mean they're not flawed. because we miss the mark lots. And there's lots of reasons why perfectly competent people don't attain the position that they deserve and that they should have for their benefit and everyone else's. The hierarchies are tainted by corruption, but fundamentally they're based on competence. So like if a lobster gets defeated in a fight, then he's statistically more likely to lose the next fight than you would guess from a tally of his previous victories. So that's the first thing. If you lose, you increase your risk of further loss. But if you win, you increase your risk of future gains. That's a very important principle. It's a crucially important principle. It governs life. But yeah, if you take a lobster and he gets all defeated and he's off pouting and won't fight anymore because he's, having a bad day, and you inject him with serotonin, essentially give him antidepressants, it's the same thing, then he'll straighten up and he'll go out and have another scrap. You should be the most reliable person at your father's funeral. That's a good goal, man. That's a good goal, because everyone's broken in a situation like that. And you adding to that brokenness and misery, I mean, you're going to be grieving, like no doubt about it. And no kidding. But there's a time to step forward with some character, and it's the same thing. You're going to be at someone's deathbed. You're going to be quibbling with your siblings while you're doing that? While your parents dying? It's like, it's bad enough that they're dying. That's tragedy, right? But you can turn that into hell, no problem. You just get a bunch of people with no character around a deathbed, and it's like, well, it's bad enough, but that turns it into something like hell. And that happens in people's lives all the time. It's like character is everything. So, and that's why the wise people of our past tradition insisted upon that. They say, well, don't lie. Well, why not? Well, it destroys your character. Well, so what? Well, then you turn suffering into hell. Is that what you want? Maybe, because people will want that. But I would say, walk away from people like that. If you win all the time, that's meaningless. Because, well, and you think, why? Because you want to win. It's like, yeah, fair enough. So why would winning all the time become meaningless? It's because your theory of winning isn't sophisticated enough. Because here's how you win. You play the game to win, but while you're playing, you play in a way so that you get better at the game, right? Because you're going to play a bunch of games. Well, it's even more than that. You play the game to win, but you play it so that you get better at the game. Okay, fine, that makes sense. So you want to push yourself, right? Because that's how you get better, and so you need competition to push yourself. So you need to have the risk of loss, because otherwise you won't do it. But here's an even better way of thinking about it. You play the game so that you don't only get better at that game, but you get better at the entire set of possible games. And that's what you do when you're a good sport. It's like, well, so how do you do that? Well, partly you find the proper level of competition, right? So you want to be pushed so that you will make the effort necessary to remove what's useless about yourself and to help foster the growth of what's useful. And if you do that, then you get the joy of participating in the game towards victory, but the extra joy of building yourself more and more strongly at the same time. And so when you tell your kid, doesn't matter whether you win or lose, it's how you play the game. Your kid says, what do you mean by that? And you say, life is not a game, it's a series of games. It's actually a series of diverse games. Okay, so who's the winner of the series of diverse games? Because that's the real question, right? Not who wins a game. It's like, whatever, you win a game. It's like, if I hold a gun to your head and we're playing chess, I could say lose. Yeah. It's like, I win. It's like, well, that's not helpful, obviously. So you want to teach your kid, you want to help your kid learn to be the winner of the set of diverse games. Okay, so what does that winner look like? Well, here's the first clue. That's the person who keeps getting invited to play. So because you win. If people invite you to play all the time, you have opportunities coming to you just nonstop. And maybe, like, let's say you have 50 opportunities and each of them are potentially 50% for you and 50% for the other person. You think, well, that's a pretty good deal. And then you think, well, wait a minute, let's flip this around. So it's like 60% for the other person and 40% for me. I'm going to go overboard in the generosity. You think, well, then what happens? Well, then instead of having 20 opportunities at every moment, you have like 50 opportunities at every moment. And that's what you want for your kids, is you want all the invisible doors around them to open. And you do that by saying, play nobly, right? Pay attention to your teammates. Pass the damn puck so they get a chance, right? Even if you're the best player on the team. Help the people on your team develop. Don't grandstand. And this instinct we have to find someone to admire, that's the deepest of religious instincts, and it's unbelievably deep in human beings. And and we have this mimicry, this capacity for mimicry that's an integral part of our cognitive architecture, and it's the precursor to thought. And we do identify, you notice you admire someone. That is the instinct to mimic, because to admire is then to want to be that, and that's the action of the moral instinct. It finds a target in the world and it says, well, I could be like that. But at first it says, this person is attractive, or this person is compelling. It grabs you. It grabs you. And that's the instinct for further development. It's a very positive thing. It can be a very positive thing.